أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the first episode of the Aqsa Frontline Podcast. My name is Muhammad, and we have with us our brother Amir, and today we'll be starting with our first podcast and the first episode of this initiative, which will aim to delve in more detail into the events that we've seen happening in Gaza and into the history of the conflict of Palestine, and especially how we as Muslims should be responding to this, to be on the front line to defend the honor of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. It's now 4 months, it's been 128 days since this conflict began, since what we know of as October 7, a day which has become a momentous, a huge day in the history of the Palestinian conflict, and hopefully will be a huge day in the history of our ummah and of Islam when we look back on it in the future. This podcast is designed for us as Muslims to look at these events in more detail, to discuss how we should be responding as Muslims from an Islamic lens with our concepts and ideas that we hold, as well as to analyze more deeply the political aspect, looking at what's happening in Gaza, more widely around Palestine and the Middle East, as well as the many political actors and agents who are contributing to this issue and how they're seeking to benefit from it, the various actions that they're taking and why they're taking these actions. We'll be delving into more detail into the various solutions that are proposed for Palestine, whether it's a two-state solution, whether it's what they call the one-state solution, talking about the occupation, its history. All of these sorts of things are what we hope to delve into through this podcast and to really analyze in a lot of detail for all of us to appreciate and understand some of the political analysis as well as the historical aspects that contribute towards the occupation of Palestine, and especially how we as Muslims, as we said, need to respond to this. Today is our first episode, and in particular, we want to reflect on the past 128 days, looking at Al-Aqsa flood, looking at the siege and the war in Gaza, and how, in particular, today, how October 7 and Al-Aqsa flood and this conflict has really shaped the world, and how the world has responded to this conflict. And so, to go straight into the topic, we really just want to look at, why in particular the whole world is so concerned over this specific conflict. And there's a lot of conflicts that, we see around us, not just in Palestine, whether it's neighboring nations like Sudan, a conflict that has been going on for over 9 months now, whether it's nations like Syria, which is still in turmoil over 12 years and ongoing, whether it's many of the various other nations around us within the Muslim Ummah, or widespread all over the world. There are conflicts that the entire world has their eyes on. But Gaza, over the last 4 months, has had the eyes of the entire world on it. It's had the eyes of the Western world, of the Middle East, of the Arab world, the Muslim world, all focused on this small patch of land. The media is in a frenzy trying to identify the correct approach, and we see the way that they coordinate their responses. And the governments of the world are collaborating and discussing this issue day and night. And so we want to unpack, why is it that Gaza has such a strong grip over the world? And so Amr, welcome. And let's go straight into the topic. Why is this conflict so significant?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You've obviously hit the nail on the head when you said that the whole international world order has its eyes on Gaza, along with its politicians, along with its governments, along with its media, along with its military, with its intelligence. The whole world has gathered upon this small patch of land, which is Gaza as we know it. And while we all watch what's happening in Gaza, the genocide that's happening in Gaza, and from day one of this conflict, we saw America, we saw Britain, we saw Europe, we saw all Western governments, we saw all Arab governments, Islamic governments come out with all that they have. They've come in all into this battle, okay? And there's one common theme when we look at how all the responses has been, whether it's the Western governments or the Islamic or Arab governments. This common theme, it looks like as though all of them were caught by surprise on the 7th of October. And the reason we say this is because if we look at the reaction of America, okay, towards these events and towards what happened, we realize that the reaction has been something that we haven't seen in the past conflicts.
Very reactive.
Very
No
reactive.
control.
And also they've gone in with the utmost power. They've went in with, they've sent out nuclear submarines. They've sent out their largest military warship. That's a moving military aircraft carrier. Okay, they haven't used this for Ukraine, the Ukraine war and Russia war, even though Russia is apparently one of the biggest threats to America. Correct? That's what they say. They haven't used it for the Russia-Ukraine war. They haven't used it in order to ward off the threat of China, which they say is a big threat to America. But they've used it for Gaza. Does Gaza really pose this big threat to the West, to the world? This small city that's been besieged for 17 years? So obviously, if we ask these questions and we look at the way Gaza is and what military capabilities does Gaza have, and who are the people of Gaza, and what's the economy like? Is it a big country? When we answer these questions, we come to a common answer, which is that it can't be all of this is just for Gaza. But we need to understand something. When we look at Palestine as a whole, okay, we've had resistance movements in Palestine for how long?
Since the conflict started.
Since the occupation started, yeah?
Fidaiyin and Fatah movement.
Yeah, so we've had like Fatah, Yasser Arafat, PLO, Jabha al-Wataniyya, the Democratic Party, Resistance, Popular Front. They still exist. Pockets of them still exist till today. And we've had many movements come and go, okay? And over all these years, we have never seen the West so spooked about a resistance, yeah? There's one point that we need to realize is that there is an acceptable level of resistance that is acceptable on the standards of the international world order. When we speak about what's happening in the world, we have to speak about the international world order and who is the one that's dominating this world order, the hegemony of the world. Okay, so they set the threshold of what is an acceptable level of resistance. So if we talk about acceptable level of resistance, we can look at the images of, for example, the Palestinian boy holding the rock in front of a tank. We all know this image, yeah? Yep. Was this boy deemed as a terrorist? No, it's a resistance. Everyone says this is a resistance, and the people are allowed to say we stand by this boy, opposing this big tank. And you saying that, you are not deemed as a person that supports terrorism. Okay. Another one is a slingshot against the occupying forces in occupied Palestine. That's an acceptable form of resistance. Molotov cocktails, acceptable form of resistance. Lone wolf attacks against occupying forces in West Bank, with whether it's small guns or knives or whatever. That's all within the acceptable sphere of resistance against occupation.
You say acceptable, so the occupation is still responding to that. They're still trying to shut this down, and they want to limit it as much as possible. Yeah. But we're talking from the views of the world order. They're not going to step in and send their ships and their planes and rain hell on a piece of land over something like this. Exactly,
and also they're not going to use their media in order to portray these people as terrorists, these people as animals, as evil, the Palestinians, okay, whilst they're resisting the occupation. We never saw this image that's trying to be portrayed through the media as we see today, okay? Now, what happened on the 7th of October? It went beyond all red lines drawn by the international world order. You, as an occupied people, as a resistance, are not allowed to step over these red lines and diminish the occupying forces, destroy a brigade on the military brigade on Gaza that's guarding around Gaza. Mm-hmm. You are not allowed to inflict major damage to the occupying force. You are not allowed to break free from this jail that you've been placed in, that's supported by the world's strongest military intelligence in the world, against one of the world's strongest armies, especially the strongest army in the Middle East. So you are not allowed, okay, to inflict damage or tarnish the image of this army and of this intelligence, the Mossad, in front of the whole world. And the moment you do that, you have crossed all red lines. And because you have crossed all red lines, you are now going to be faced with the most devastating power, backed by America, backed by the West, funded by them, provided with militaries, provided with militias, okay, in order to teach the Palestinians a lesson.
You can't cross these lines.
Yeah, don't you dare do that again. And to put them back into the cage and to tell them, did you really think that you were under siege for the past 17 years? Did you really think that was a siege? We'll show you what a siege looks like. Now we're going to show you what a siege looks like. Now we're going to say to you, you are not allowed to have a drop of water. You're not allowed to have food. You're not allowed to have medicine. You're not allowed to have insulin. You're not allowed to let your injured and ill, sick people, even people with cancer that need urgent treatment, exit the strip. You want to know what a siege looks like? You said you were under siege for 17 years. Now we're going to really show the world and show you and teach you a lesson what a siege looks like, because you have dared to cross the red lines of the international world order. And that's what we're facing today.
Do you know what's interesting though? You mentioned that they've got these red lines, and that the issue is that the Palestinians crossed these red lines, and therefore this is our response because you've crossed these red lines. But you mentioned before that, right at the start, that the world was not ready for this. The West wasn't ready for this. Israel as a state wasn't ready for this, right? And their response has been very reactive. It's not like they had a red line, and if you cross this red line, we prepared, and this is what our response is going to be. They've had some sort of idea that obviously will worsen the siege, will place these barriers, will attack us within whatever force that we can manage. But the way that they've been responding has been uncoordinated at times. There's been a mix of messages politically within the Zionists themselves, within them and their allies in the West. And even their military response has been inconsistent at times. They make one plan and they make another, then they send their troops in, then back out, and then deciding to target different areas at different times. So even though they've got these red lines, they never expected that somebody would dare to cross them. And so it seems like they weren't even, the reaction that they've had wasn't previously prepared, wasn't something that they had like, written down on paper. This is our plan if they attack and they do 1, 2, 3. It's just they can't believe that somebody would have dared to cross these red lines. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that's really, really transformed this conflict since October 7 is that somebody has crossed these lines. These lines are not barriers anymore in the minds of the people, which is what they've tried to limit more than anything, is to limit the minds, limit the what you can possibly imagine that you could do as resistance. And so it seems like the reaction wasn't even prepared.
Yeah, I mean, the reaction of Israel, the reaction of America and the West at large, you can see that it was, they were not prepared for this. And one of the reasons why we saw that America came out with its full force and America was really pissed off with what happened is because this couldn't have come at a worse time for America, okay? Because if we look at America's stance and where America is standing on the world stage today, it's already facing, before October 7, it's already facing multiple challenges on multiple fronts, okay? One of them was Russia. But what they've done with Russia is they initiated a war, okay? They funded Ukraine. Now they've got Europe funding Ukraine as well, and they've got Russia and Russia fighting on the lands of Ukraine, okay? Whilst America is weakening Russia's military capabilities in Ukraine, okay? Now they've got that down pat. It's been going on now. Ukraine and Europe is in on the plan, and America is okay. Now this is under control, kind of thing. And then when it comes to the Middle East, America was also wanting to put the Middle East under control. They wanted to move to something for them as a hegemony of the world. They wanted to move towards something that they think is an upcoming threat, which is China. So they wanted to focus their energy and focus their military and capabilities and intelligence on China, on containing China's growing power, okay? And when they were about to put the Middle East to sleep, as to say, they had a few things going. One of them was, if we remember back in Trump's days, the Abrahamic Accords. Okay, Abrahamic Accords, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Okay, you're all Abrahamic religions. You can all unify, and they were opening up a temple in UAE, and that's one of the projects. And obviously, this is a long-term project. It's not going to happen overnight. The purpose of this was to say that you people can coexist peacefully together. Obviously, us as Muslims, we'll talk about this later, we have no issues with Jews and Christians living in our lands as per our history. But from a political aspect, we can coexist peacefully, okay? Except Israel in the region. That's one of the most important parts of it was, except Israel in the region as a neighbor and coexist and live in harmony together.
You said it was a very long-term plan, but it was still very rapid.
That's right.
So over the past 4 or 5 years that they really, really pushed this, and it grew faster than anyone would have expected. And it have last year, 2022? 2023, it was just last year in Hajj, the khutbah at Arafah. And the focus was on almost the Abraham Accords and this similar sort of concept of the Abrahamic religions and the coexistence and so on. To have that rapid rise, they really were trying to sort of dampen these sort of concepts in the Muslim world.
Yeah, that's right. And it's good that you brought up the khutbah and Arafah, because I was coming to this point. And that point was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia was going to play a very important role in this. And this was coming up, as we saw it coming up, in the normalization deals that were being prepared between Saudi and Israel. Now, we had other Arab nations before that normalized ties, but it was creeping up to Saudi. And we know that Saudi plays this role in the region, it represents Muslim Sunni people, okay? That's what the role it wants to play before. And so it was creeping up towards normalizing ties with Israel. Obviously had its conditions with America. It said to America, Mohammed bin Salman said to America, okay, in order for us to normalize ties with Israel, we have no issues, but we need to secure some interests for our own country and for the region, for ourselves in the region. And if we were able to secure these interests for Saudi, we have no issues with normalizing ties with Israel. And from those interests was not the Palestinian issue, was not Palestine, was not the Palestinian people.
That's right.
And that's one of the things that really caught the attention of the Muslim world and the Palestinians as well. That, hey, you guys are going to normalize ties with Israel. What about us? Like, you're not even bringing up our issue to the table, you know? So obviously here, everyone's looking after their own interests in the region, okay? And they've forgotten the greater interest of the Muslims in the region, which is Palestine. And then that's the second thing. So we had the Abraham Accords and normalization deals happening. And we had the economic route that's coming from India it's going through Saudi, and then it's going through to Israel, I forgot which port it was, through Israel, and then it's connecting to Europe, okay? So this was a large economic route that America was working towards in order to replace China with India on a long-term plan. And everyone, part of this deal was going to benefit immensely. Because you can imagine this big route of trade going through these countries and stopping here. That was a big thing. So you had these three things that they were working on in the region. And if they pulled through, America can put its feet in cold water in regards to the Middle East, in regards to Palestine, because we know Palestine has always had a lot of, obviously, chaos since the occupation of Palestine. And it can put its feet in cold water and focus its energy and focus on China. And that's where its intelligence and strategic interests lie in the future for them.
And just to go back, but with the Abraham Accords, it wasn't just, of course, Saudi that was doing this, or just Saudi and the UAE. But once the deal sort of started taking off through these nations, in particular as the leaders, we saw many others of the Muslim nations also taking advantage of this and choosing to seek their own benefit for their nations by recognizing instead of Israel. We saw it with like Sudan and with Morocco and many of these nations who saw the opportunity. They've got issues internally, whether it's their debts, whether it's their political issues that they're trying to deal with. And America always sort of plays these two sides and tries to ignite these conflicts so that when the time comes, they can then use it for their benefit. And this was exactly the case, where they would give them what they wanted. Sudan, this is what you're asking. We'll give it to you, but just recognize the state of Israel. And so we saw this rapidly, as we mentioned, sort of rising throughout the last few years in particular.
Yeah, that's definitely correct. And obviously we saw like they've been keeping each country busy with its own interests and with its own local conflicts and with its own regional conflicts, and in the meantime trying to put off greater conflicts such as the Palestine issue, and then move on whilst the region can take care of itself. And then you had like other players in the region like Turkey, who was more than willing to help America in certain areas, like Libya, for example, sending its forces to Libya. We saw Iran, for example, playing an important role with the US in Iraq. It helped the US in Iraq. It helped the US in Syria. So it played an important role. And Afghanistan, and then the conflict in Yemen. Okay, so the US has a greater plan for the region. Okay, in order to further divide even further than it was before. And it had certain players that would play a certain role in each region, in each country, in order to carry out this plan. And it had obviously trusted partners in the region, as we can say. And then, so all these trusted partners of the US have been also caught off guard.
Yep.
And these trusted partners of the US, like Turkey, like Iran, like Saudi, like Jordan, like Egypt, like all these countries, what happened on October 7 and what's happening today in Gaza has really exposed them for who they really are in front of their own people.
That's right.
Like, they were not prepared for this. Usually they're prepared. They've got like a bit of action, a bit of agreements, a bit of understanding between them and Israel. We're going to do this. You're going to accept it. We're going to put a bit of pressure. But this time nothing was planned. And it really exposed them, and the masks have been ripped off their faces. And so everyone, and even the me, you know how we had Erdogan always talking big, tough. Iran at the beginning of the conflict, the foreign minister of Iran, he came on Al Jazeera. I watched this interview, and he said, this was probably maybe a few weeks or a month into the conflict. He said, we give Israel another week, a week or 2 weeks. He said, if they do not stop, they will see our response. It was big words, threatening. Okay, if you heard it, you think, wow, something big is going to happen. And if you remember, there was some things on Twitter at that time about they've raised the flag and that's it, the time has come. You know,
That's right. Yeah,
so that was a month or two into the conflict. And then a week went by, 2 weeks went by. Where's Iran? Iran has been wiping its hand clean from what's happening. Even from the Iraqi resistance groups that are fighting against America today, they're saying they've got nothing to do with us. The Houthis, they've got nothing to do with us. What happened?
Nothing to do with us. They've stepped back from everything. That's
yeah.
right.
So what happened there? Because what? Because now they know that the issue is greater than them coming out and supporting it. Because if they do support it, and if they do stand behind it, then it puts a risk to their own strategic interests in the region, which fall in line with America's interests.
That's right.
So now everyone has to toe the line behind the US. They have no choice. The US has put a red line for them as well. That's why we saw Anthony Blinken visit Qatar, visit Turkey, Egypt.
Immediately. That was their first action.
He's now done 5 trips around to them. 5 trips to each one of them, and then going to Israel in the end saying, I'm here as a Zionist.
That's right.
Each time. And so when he goes there, what's he doing? He's telling them time and time again, make sure, okay, you abide by the red lines, you keep your people seduced, you keep your people, keep their mouths shut. There are red lines for your own people, for the protests. They can't go to the borders, they can't ask for military intervention, they can't agitate the armies, they can't do 1, 2, 3, 4. And you need to be tough and strict with your people. And economical trade and routes have to be open towards the Israel. We've seen this from Saudi, from Jordan, from UAE, from Turkey, all of them. Economical trade has even increased during the war to Israel, whilst Gaza is under a siege that's killing the people today.
So going back, you mentioned that this conflict couldn't have come at a worse time from America. So explaining what America's been trying to do, trying to control Russia, trying to control the Middle East, and then recognizing China as their biggest threat, as what they thought was their biggest threat. So why is this the worst time for America now?
It's because America has multiple issues. One of them is the external factor. You know, you have Russia, okay, in the Ukraine war. Then you can call it a Cold War with China. Okay, they formed the AUKUS agreement between the various countries: Australia, UK, America, and New Zealand, and they formed alliances in order to contain China. Okay, and then China has been obviously babbling about wanting to take over Thailand because it's part of their own. Yeah. And then it's got its own internal divide, which is widening inside America. And then we have the elections this year. So all of these factors coming together, this couldn't have come at a worse time for America.
It's a huge election. The conflict between left and right is just widening and widening every single year. It's almost two different nations that exist within America, two different political ideologies completely.
Yeah, and what's happening today in Palestine further spreads this wedge. You know, because you have people in America, you have people in the West who can really see what's happening thanks to social media, thanks to TikTok, thanks to Instagram, where we have reporters on the ground from Gaza showing the world what's happening live every single day. And then the people are seeing what's happening, and then they are seeing what their own governments are saying, and it's not adding up. So now the people's eyes have opened up. Okay, and now they know that their governments are complicit in the genocide in Gaza. And they are starting to question their own governments. These are Western people we're talking about.
That's right. I was at the protest today in Sydney, and the majority of the chants, half, if not at least half the chants, are directed at America, they're directed at Australia, Albanese, at Penny Wong, and we see this across all of the Western world. We see in America the amount of popularity that Biden has lost in response to Gaza. What's interesting when you look at it, you see Biden's popularity rates and you compare them to sort of, his popularity, what the polls are saying, and how much of a dip there has been over the last 4 months. He's lost about 10 or 20 popularity points, which is unprecedented. It's happened previously with wars. Whenever America goes into a big war, they see a dip in popularity for the president. But usually what it's due to is because the people don't want to send their armies to war. It's their families, their brothers, it's their friends that are going to the war and that are fighting over in Vietnam, over in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on, and they don't want to send their kids to go to this war. But this is the first time that a president has lost so much popularity over a conflict that America isn't even directly involved in. Like, they're not sending their own troops, they're not sending their own boys, but it's purely from the concept that, as you said, the masks have fallen. People can clearly see this for what it is. Nobody can look at this from an objective perspective and say that, I don't stand with the people of Gaza, that I stand with Israel. Nobody's saying that. Everyone with an open mind is looking at this and saying, yeah, this is a bit too far. No matter whether, they support whatever solution for the Middle East, if they've never heard of the Middle East before, nobody looks at this, doesn't say this is too far. So when they see their politicians lining up so strongly in support of the Zionists, that's a huge, huge wake-up call for people in the West. That's them realizing that, there's the amount of popularity that Joe Biden has lost, that, it's not worth it for me to vote for the Democrats. If this is what I'm voting for, yeah, Trump might be worse in whatever many dozens of ways from their perspective, but how can I vote for somebody who's supporting this genocide so blatantly with their weapons, with their words, with their media? We see it in Australia, the amount of popularity that Albanese and the Labour Party has lost, and the election is still a while away, but we'll definitely see them take a big hit. We see it in the UK now, they're going into the elections very soon as well, and their Labour Party has taken them, even though they're not in power, even though they're not the ones in power, but because they've taken that political stance, their own supporters, who typically are a bit more open-minded with these sort of things, have just completely shunned the party. And it's, like you said, unprecedented. Like, we would never have imagined in the past that American government would sit in Senate and try to vote for a bill to send a certain amount of military aid to Israel, and they barely passed. It was a 50-50. That we've never seen. Previously, it's always America, unwavering support, no questions asked. Israel, no problem. We need Israel. That's our ally in the Middle East. But the fact there's questions being asked in the Congress, in the Senate, the fact that people are out in their hundreds of thousands every single week in the major cities protesting, that takes a hit on the country. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. But there's one thing that you said, that the way America sees Israel as an ally. Actually, the way America sees Israel, as they see it as an advanced military base in the Middle East for them. It's the 51st state.
Yeah, that's right, 51st state. It's an extension of America.
That's right. And
this brings us back to Israel, okay, and what's happening today. There's 4 things we need to keep in mind with what's happening today. Number one, where Israel is losing, there's many fronts. Despite all the atrocities we are seeing, despite the genocide that we are seeing in Gaza against the civilians, against innocent people, which inshallah they are martyrs and Allah accepts them as martyrs, and all the injured, everything that's happening, despite all this, okay, the number one thing we need to know is that the project of the Zionist entity relies heavily on populating this Zionist entity with Jews. Yeah, that's how it's advertised.
That's right.
The safe haven for Jews, the land for Jews. Okay, so in order for this project to succeed and strive, it needs to be able to populate this land with the Jews, the Zionist Jews. Okay, and to provide them the security and this 1, 2, 3, 4. That's their project. Yeah?
That's the number one thing: safety.
That's
safety
right.
and security.
And where this has copped a hit today, the number of Zionists leaving Israel is unprecedented. Like 30,000 in a day. The other day they reported, just last week. So I think that we've reached maybe 1 million now.
The numbers are over 1 million.
Over 1 million they have left since
That's of a
the 7th of October.
population, 7 million Jews, 7 to 9 million that live within the occupied lands. 1 million have left.
That's just the beginning. This is just started, yeah? 1 million have left. The second thing we need to keep in mind is how many from outside are going to actually make hijrah, okay, to Israel in order to live there. You know, all this, because I remember before.
Make aliyah, that's what they call it.
Yeah, the past 2 years I've been seeing advertisement like crazy on LinkedIn, on Facebook. Make hijrah, what's it called?
Aliyah.
Yeah, Aliyah.
Aliyah.
Make Aliyah to Israel, come to Israel, to the Zionists, obviously. To
expanding the settlements in the West Bank.
Yeah. There was a lot of advertisement happening, social media, everything. Now we need to ask a question, and they need to ask a question: how many from around the world are actually going to go there now? And one of the main reasons there was a huge number of them going there in the past year was because of the Ukraine war and Russia-Ukraine war. Many of them are Ukrainian and Russian. So a lot of them went to Israel. Yeah. So they've left the war zone. They've gone to Israel thinking this is the safe haven we've been enticed to. Now we've come here and it's not really what we thought. So how many are going to go there after today?
The image has been shattered.
It's been shattered. The image has been shattered to an extent beyond repair. That's what I believe. The third thing is Israel has been seen in the world in the economical sense as one of the number one global startup countries in the world for tech, for innovation, for everything, for medicine, number one. And it was the next Silicon Valley. So you saw all these big companies, huge companies opening up in Israel with raising funds and opening up fintechs and all that stuff happening there.
You see it when you look at the boycott list, especially in like the tech world. It's just, you can't do anything without touching Zionist companies. They're everywhere, especially in the tech world.
Yeah, that's because they've built themselves up. They've got the money. They've got the dollars. Okay, they're building their economy. They've made partnerships with UAE and the US, and they've done all that. Okay, and now they were thriving. Whilst remember during the pandemic, during COVID, okay, what happened with startups and fintechs and entrepreneurs and all that stuff that boosted.
Yeah,
the online world boosted, and there was a lot of companies popping up in tech, in medicine, and all that. So Israel played a big role there. Now, if we look at a few days ago, there was a report by Moody. It's a company that does the ratings for global ratings for countries. Israel went from
1A to 1B.
What was it?
Is it from 1A to 1B? So they've dropped it.
Yeah, 1A to 1B or 1A to 2B or something like that. Dropping the rating from stable to what was the word they used? Unstable. That in order for you to put your money there, it's not stable anymore, Israel as an economy. And Netanyahu saw how important this was. He actually came out and commented on this and said, actually, this rating is not because of the war, it's because of other factors. But everyone knows it's because of the war. And the fourth point...
Economically, they've taken a big hit as well.
Economically, yeah, definitely.
Because the people aren't working, they've been called to the reserve armies, because of the amount of businesses that have shut down due to the shelling in different areas, especially in the envelopes surrounding Gaza and in the northern occupied territories. Many of the businesses that have shut down and haven't had the opportunity to reopen as well. And then obviously the blocked trade routes through the Red Sea. So economically, they're struggling as well.
Yeah, that's definitely right. And although like many countries are trying to help them recover or to help them keep obviously alive, keep them alive during this war, like Jordan, Saudi, UAE, all these countries, Turkey, they've still economically copped a hit. And then the fourth thing is, we come back to the point that we left off with you last, was that how Israel is is seen as a military base for the US and for the Western world. And now, this is why one of the responses of the US and the Western world was so harsh with coming out with all their forces, with their warships, with their planes, with their ammunition, with everything, was because how important Israel is for them. Okay, they will stand by it and they will support it till the last breath because it plays an important role for them. But now the question comes, since the image of this army that cannot be defeated has been defeated, okay, by 1,500 fighters with Kalashnikovs, etc. This image has been defeated, okay. This image of that they've built up about the undefeatable nation that we need to work with in the region. You need to be allies with them. You need to work with them in order to survive, to sustain yourself, because and they fed the people in Arab world, in the Muslim world, that obviously us as governments, us as armies, we cannot defeat Israel, so we need to work with them. Obviously, this has been diminished. Now, look at how much America is spending in funding dollars, in ammunition, in mercenaries. Look how much it's spending today in this war in order to fund this war. So basically, Israel is fighting this war with American weapons, with American money, with American everything. So America is fighting this war, okay? Now the question we need to ask is, when the time comes that Israel becomes a burden on the West and a burden on America, what's going to happen there? When it becomes a burden, not an asset. And that's where it becomes dangerous for the existence of Israel in this region, when it becomes a burden on them, not an asset. And they need to start asking questions. And these questions have already been are starting to pop up in America. Like you said, in the Congress, there was people opposing more money going to Israel for the first time. Yeah. So now these questions are already being asked in the US, saying, why are our tax dollars going to Israel, who is committing genocide under the eyes of the world? And there has to be answers given, if not today, then tomorrow.
Yeah. And I think those are related to sort of that military image of Israel. I think if I was to look at it, probably two of the biggest things that prop up the Zionist state, that allow it to continue to exist, is number one, their continued support from the West. Without that support and aid from the West, the Zionist project doesn't continue. From the day that it was created, its conception required Herzl to run around to all of these Western nations and to beg them to support this project until the UK took it on, because it fit within their project in the Middle East. And it's required that ongoing support from the UK and then from America. Without that support, even during this conflict, like you said, the amount of aid that they've been getting, they don't survive without the Western military and political support. And then the second thing is, of course, the protection that they get from the neighboring nations and their governments, the Jordanian army and the Egyptian army, literally protecting these borders with the Zionist entity. So the fact that their military has taken such a big hit and that America continues to donate essentially all of this money to the Zionists, that raises so many questions for the people. Like that, this is our tax money that we're sending over. Here in Australia, there was some money that was being sort of sent to a Zionist, but then just recently they announced support for victims of terrorist attacks, supposedly people who have relatives or who were there, up to $75,000. Like, people are in uproar. Like, this is my money. I'm paying my taxes. I'm paying an insane amount of taxes, 30, 40, 50%. And that's going to supporting a project that I don't even support. It's supporting this genocide, whether it's militarily, whether it's funding money to people who have up to 75,000 as somebody's salary, right? That causes agitation for the people. And of course, for the those who are in power, they need the support from the people, like we see with Biden now losing that support and slowly trying to find ways to twist his words as much as he can, with whatever brain function he has, trying to twist his words to sort of placate the people as well. Saying yesterday that, I've always held that, my position is that Israel has gone too far, right? Like, he says that to placate his people. But above all of that, the actions continue. The actions are still the same. And so the people continue to respond with increased agitation against the governments. And so it's a big threat towards the Western support for the nations. And then once this image of the Zionists is destroyed, the main thing, whenever you talk to somebody like, last year, as recently as last year, about why don't the governments or the armies do X, Y, Z to Israel? Why don't they get involved? Why don't they send aid? Why don't they send threats and so on? Is always, look what happened back in the, the October War. Back in the 60s and the 70s and the 6-Day War and so on. Look what happened. All of these Arab nations combined. We tried to fight them. They defeated us in 6 days and so on. So there's always been this image of the army that can't be defeated. Now that's been diminished, like I said, not shattered, because there's still people that use the same logic. There's still people that hold on to these ideas, and for whatever reason, they don't understand whatever might be the underlying factors. But it's played a big part. And these are the two factors, I think, the protection of the Arab nations and the support from the West, which have been a massive risk, and that's why this conflict has been so significant in people's eyes.
I think, the argument that this is one of the greatest armies that can't be destroyed in the Arab world. This argument that's been used by people that stand with the governments and the regimes and the armies, etc. Even that argument they're not using today. I've realized something. They've shifted the argument, and now the argument they're using is, do you want us to go up against America and the West? Yeah. Like, you've got America in the with their military aircraft carrier. You've got America in the region. Do you think we can take on America? I've seen obviously we post out news and analysis, etc. And we see Pakistani brother came up to me and said, we're Pakistan, we're a third world country, we can't really do anything against America. Turks said same thing. All these Iranian supporters, all these people come out with these arguments that
just take
we can't take on America. We can't take on America. Okay, so what's America can't even shut the Houthis up. Okay, with what's happening today, and America is even willing. Okay, America's been saying we don't want an escalation in the region since day one, but who's pouring oil on the fire? It's America.
That's right.
How? Because they are funding and sending mercenaries and sending weapons to the Zionist entity, whilst allowing the genocide to happen and supporting the genocide, and they don't want anyone else from the Muslim world to make noise. And when the Houthis make noise, okay, now all of a sudden Biden comes out and says Houthis are now terrorists, even though it was Trump that put them as a terrorist organization in the US before. And then Biden came in and took them off. He said that we see them as a potential partner in the region. We can probably work with them. Obviously, America tries to contain and work with various resistance groups and various military groups, like they did in Iraq, in Syria, in Afghanistan with the Taliban before against the Russians. Obviously, they try and use and work with these groups where it benefits them. And when the moment it doesn't benefit them, they put them back as a terrorist organization. It's like a switch, on and off, on and off. It's, and the other day I saw another, Biden came out and said, actually we can in the future we can still maybe take them off the terrorist list. So there's a window open.
You support us, you're not terrorists. When you're against us, you're terrorists.
They even proposed to the Houthis. They said to them, we will officially recognize you as the official government of Yemen if you stop your attacks against Israel. And the Houthis came out and said, get lost. Yeah. We're not stopping until the war stops. Okay. And so America was even willing to escalate the tensions in Yemen to an extent where Bab al-Mandab can be completely shut off due to the escalation there, which would cause major surge in price in oil, in products, in shipping, etc. Everywhere in the world.
All of the world.
It will impact the whole world. Mm-hmm. America is willing to go that far for the sake of Israel. Britain is willing to go that far for the sake of Israel. Mm-hmm. And we can see to what extent they're willing to go to, okay? Yet, although they're willing to go to that extent, but they are not able to turn off the fires they started. Remember, they started these fires.
That's right.
But they are not able to turn them off. And now we have many pockets of little flares going on. Iraq, Syria, Egypt, we had those drug dealers.
Supposedly drug dealers.
Supposedly drug dealers that went through from Egypt to Israel, 20 of them, and there's clashes, etc. And you have Yemen, Jordan, there's a bit of movement, people putting more pressure. Let's cut off the supply route to Israel. A person organized a protest last Friday in order to cut off the supply to protest in front of the the road that leads to Israel, where the shipment's coming, and he was arrested straight away, arrested and jailed. Imagine.
They shut down the protests.
Shut down the protests as well. And they on Friday they blocked the cars from going, taxis, cars, buses. No one's allowed to go to the area. So you can see to what extent they're willing to go to the extent where they are willing to allow the regimes to directly clash with their people in order to protect Israel. Imagine to the audacity that we have come to, where the regimes in Egypt, in Jordan specifically, because those two countries, if they go loose, then Israel's in danger. It's in real danger.
Egypt's been even harsher than Jordan. In Egypt, you don't see protests on the streets. You see individuals that go out and protest. There was an old lady, Hajjah, out in the street holding up a sign, arrested. And anyone that goes out with any voice, shut down straight away. Within the first week or two, there were some protests, but then the ferocity with which they were shut down, the people were scared to come out, especially in the history of obviously what's happened with the revolution, with Rabia, what's happened to the Ikhwan, the hundreds of thousands that are languishing in their prisons. The people are scared to come out in the streets naturally. And it's been that harsh that what it's done, interestingly, is that it's such a short-term solution, because they're shutting down these protests, they're shutting down the ability to block off these trade routes, but then they're increasing the agitation of the people towards their own rulers. Like in Egypt, whatever popularity Sisi might have had, which is not very much to begin with. In Mexique, it's gone. It's gone. Like the people that have they never had any love for him, but now it's gone. There's no reputation, there's no trust. And in Jordan as well, the amount of people who have lost that whatever trust that they had in their government, like it's such a short-term strategy, which is why I say, like going back to the start, that the whole response has been so reactive. It's like none of this was coordinated. They didn't know how can we control these flares that come up. They had no idea of what can we do to control the region. It's just been trying to put out flares, a lot of short-term solutions, band-aid solutions, which will just continue to agitate things in the long term.
That's right, and these short-term solutions are all done in the bid to keep Israel alive, prolong Israel's life, buy some time, get Israel back on its feet, okay? And in order for Israel to allow Israel to do what it wants to do in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, okay? And this takes us to Jerusalem. That's one of the main, the most important factor of this whole war, correct?
Sorry, just before that, you were talking just about people being scared of agitating America. And how can we fight against such a force and America and all of its power and everything? But it's such a dangerous line of thinking. I think we just need to unpack this a little bit more. That mentality that we can't go to war to defend, whether it's Gaza, whether it's Al-Aqsa, because of the risk that America will come and put their full force against us. That mentality is so dangerous because it really, really, really restricts any form of any resistance at any point in time. Imagine what was happening in Gaza right now was happening within Jordan. Israel decided to go full blast against the Jordanian people for whatever reason, or against the Egyptian people, or against the Turkish people, or against the Saudi people. They decided that we're going to send all of our rockets and siege the entire city of Jeddah and attack 2 million people that are within there. Nobody in Saudi would be coming out and saying, we can't agitate Israel's army. You're going to defend yourself. But the only reason people have this mentality, number one, is because they don't see us as one ummah. That's the Gazan people, that's the Palestinian people. This is us on the other side. We can only do so much to support you from far. We'll send you some aid, we'll send whatever we can. But really, it's your problem, not mine.
Issue.
Yeah, I'm not involved in this conflict. Not recognizing, of course, the Islamic concept that we have of, of being one ummah, of the blood of your brother, of love for your brother, what you love for yourself, of the blood of a Muslim is worth more than the Kaaba. None of this exists in their minds. And the second thing is that, at what point will you be willing to face America? Because this isn't the first conflict that we see, in the Middle East and the Muslim world, and this won't be the last, right? What will you do when America invades one of our countries if they decide to do so? They've done it in the past with Iraq and Afghanistan. Will you then say, I'm not going to respond when they attack my own country because I can't bear to face the brunt of their attacks? Or whatever other conflicts that you face, because you will face conflicts. You can't avoid it, right? And at what point will you say that this is too far, that we're now ready to respond? Are you saying that there's no red line and you're never ready to face America or the allies? Right? There has to be a point where you say that, okay, even if we have less numbers, this is the line that's been crossed, right? Even if we face the risk of losing, this is the line that's been crossed. And we need to mobilize and we need to do something. But to do nothing at all and say, look, it's above us, it's too big. And of course, it neglects all the Islamic concepts that we know of. How many battles have the Muslims gone to and been victorious despite the lesser numbers? It's never been about numbers in our history. In the seerah, in the history of Islam, it's never been about numbers. But it's that sincere conviction as a Muslim that I am doing this for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And when you do that, look at how much support, for example, the Houthis have had from the Muslim people. Despite whatever history that they have, which most people don't know, within the Yemeni conflict, right? The moment that they see somebody supporting the Palestinian people and what they're going through right now. They have full-blown support from Muslims around the world, right? The fact that people like Bashar and Iran still have some sort of credibility amongst lay people, right? Because they somehow take a firm stance against the Zionists, despite everything that they've done within Syria, shows that the moment that you take a stand for the people of Palestine, this is an issue that people are willing to stand up for you for.
I think it's a, I think, so obviously it comes back to the where the people's minds are at, okay? And their mentalities at, and their convictions. And this nationalism really was deep in the heart of the people, okay? A lot of people. But with what's happening today, I think this really helps agitate that thinking thought process about really, should I really care about, like, is my line thinking correct? Like I could, me sitting in Jordan, I can sit down and watch this genocide happening in Gaza, which is a few hours away at max, okay? While I am living safely, in peace, okay? And as long as I'm safe and I'm in peace and my family is safe, they are being burnt to death. Or the people in Egypt, it's literally one border. And you see the children of Gaza saying, look, I'm now standing between life and death. This is death and that's life, a rock throw away. So I think, obviously there's always a wisdom behind what happens. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom is greater than what we can really fathom, yeah? And I think the wisdom of what's happening today and how big of events are happening today in front of our eyes is working towards this change that we're talking about. And the first thing for us to overcome this nationalism and all these ideas that have crept up in the Ummah is to destroy these barriers in the minds of the people.
That's right.
And the moment you destroy them, okay, they are willing to sacrifice everything for the sake of their Muslim brothers and sisters. And we saw, like you said, the Yemeni people. Look at the Yemeni people, millions in the streets on Fridays, saying, even though they're getting bombed by America and UK today, they're saying we are willing to keep going all the way for Palestine, although they were under...
They're just coming out of a war for the past 10 years, the worst famine that we've seen.
Worst famine we've seen. Children dying during a civil war. But
the videos that you see of people in Yemen, as the bombs are being dropped, like literally just a kilometer away, and they're saying, bring it on, World War III, bring it on, we're willing to do this for the people of Palestine. We've reached your status of honor. Yeah. And now we're being attacked just like you're being attacked. So you're not more deserving to be attacked than we are.
It's because
that mentality.
Yeah, they've got the right understanding that this is one ummah. And if someone is aching, we need to help them. And if I start to ache because I'm helping them, then we're doing something correct. We're doing something right. And so that's why we see that America and the Arab governments and the Muslim governments keep saying this line. They're saying the war has to stop now. The more it prolongs, the more of a risk that things are going to get out of control. What do they mean here? Okay, do they mean that King Abdullah is going to wake up tomorrow and say, you know what, I'm a Muslim, that's it, I've had enough of this, I'm going to get my armed forces going? Or Erdogan's going to wake up and say, I'm going to remember my heritage as a sultan, Ottoman Empire, I'm going to take my army and go fight? That's not what they mean. They mean that the longer it prolongs, the more people realize, okay, what the hell are we doing? And how can we sit here silently watching what's happening in Gaza? And then they start to realize, okay, we are Muslim. They start to remember their Islamic sentiments and what ties the bond of Islam, the bond of Aqidah, okay? And these thoughts start to turn into action, okay? And this is where the Ummah has been falling short for the past 100 years, where we've been an Ummah of reactions, okay?
Not even reactions, bystanders.
Just bystanders, at max reactions, yeah? When something happens, we react to put band-aid solutions on it. And then we're back to as bystanders, back to our normal life, okay? But we're not proactively seeking to change. We're just emotional. But the moment these emotions start to transcend into political actions, into Islamic change, okay? Where it's no longer about emotions, because, let's be frank, is my emotions and your emotions the same as the first month of the war? It's not. Because that's...
Emotions go up and down.
Yeah, it's up and down. We're humans at the end of the day. And as much as it kills you to look at what's happening today, and you haven't got that burning fire inside of you, like that rage where you're emotional, like it was in the first month.
Yeah.
Okay. But this is where the danger is. If we are just emotional, then we are guided by our emotions. That when we are emotional towards an event, we want to do something. But the moment these emotions die, we can easily go back to our normal life, go back to work, go back to looking after our family. Allah ain home, inshallah, things get better there. Yeah. I'm no longer emotionally attached to this cause. Mm-hmm. And the moment this is the point. So we need to leave that emotional attachment to this cause and go back to the roots of it as an Islamic attachment, as an Islamic obligation. And this takes us back to our deen, what our religion asks of us, and to go back and start working towards real change and not just emotional outpours.
The emotion is important, but when we're triggered by these emotions, it should be a reminder for us to then channel that emotion into long-term action and consistent action and proper, the relevant action to whatever problem that we're facing. Like a way to think of it is like our salah, right? When we're praying. There's times where your connection with Allah Azza wa Jal is up here and you want to get up and pray and you're doing extra salah. You might be praying your tahajjud or whatever you're doing, right? You have that extra connection and the extra khushu'. There's moments where, like, frankly, some of us, we just can't be bothered, right? The emotion isn't necessarily there. But we get up and we do it anyway because it's an obligation. This should be a reminder for us, our duty towards Al-Aqsa, our duty towards our Muslim blood, Muslim brothers and sisters, our Muslim land which is now occupied, is a fard upon our ummah. My emotion might trigger me at certain times that I do all of these things. At other times, my emotion might be low. But that shouldn't mean that I stop acting, because action is an obligation. It's not something that I only do when I'm emotional. Something that I have to consistently identify what is the right action for me to be taking and do it. And if I don't have the answers, then obviously it's seek those answers. Study, understand, speak to the right people and find those answers, and then take that relevant action. But when we get, like you said, bystanders, we're paralyzed, or we take a step back and we forget about the issue, then that's an issue. That's a problem. Alhamdulillah, I think now more than ever, people are still, continuous with their efforts. They're continuous with their actions, trying to do what they can. Sometimes it's, an issue of, lack of understanding of what can I be doing or what should I be doing. But in general, people's emotions are still there, and then their actions are still there, whether it's the things that they're sharing online, whether it's the conversations that we're having with people. Alhamdulillah, 4 months is a long time. But despite that, after 4 months, we're still having these conversations. As elections come up in all of these Western countries, and specifically talking about the West, people still have the issue of Palestine at the forefront of their minds. The protests, people are still going. There's still events happening in mosques, and khutab are still addressing this issue, which isn't common for an issue to go on for 4 months and still be at the forefront of our minds. And obviously in the Muslim world, it's still, right at the center of their heart. And they haven't forgotten, they haven't moved on. So alhamdulillah, the emotion is still there and the action is still there to some extent. But it's about channeling that into the right actions which will produce us long-term solutions, not just actions that then satisfy my emotions.
Yeah, and I think it's I think the Muslims as well don't really realize how dangerous this Zionist project is on Masjid al-Aqsa and what they've been working towards in the past few years. No one's following events. No one knows. No one really knows how dangerous it is, where things have reached.
I think even like the normalization, people weren't aware that Abraham Accords, they respect the average person, they don't know about this stuff, they're not following the events.
And I remember we sat down in this room maybe around, when was it? Around 6 or 7 months ago. We were talking about in a podcast about Saudi normalizing deals with Israel, because obviously, if you're following events, you can follow what's happening, and you talk about how dangerous this move is, if it's going to happen, and where it's going to lead to, yeah? Whereas if you're not following events, you have no clue what's happening. And then one day you're going to wake up, you're going to find Masjid al-Aqsa has been destroyed. But I ask, what's going to be the response of the Ummah? If the Ummah hasn't really taken that level that it needs to, in order to stop the Zionist aggression, in order to stop the Zionist occupation, after seeing the bombing of hospitals in front of our eyes, the killing of children, the little girl, Hind, that yesterday they found that she was dead, obviously after 12 days of Allah Yarhamah. We see all this in front of our eyes, okay? It's like a waterfall of blood. It's a river of blood now, okay? and it hasn't really moved the ummah to the extent where they are willing to sacrifice their comfort and sacrifice everything that they have for the sake of Palestine and for the sake of the Muslim brothers and sisters in Gaza. What will it take? Okay. And I fear that if it's not, with what's happening today in the world, with America's position weakening in the global stage, with the events happening in Russia, Ukraine, with the Cold War with China, with the events in the Middle East, okay, there are many moving parts. And these many moving parts only happen every so often, yeah? And these opportunities only come about for nations to fall and rise every 100 or so years, or 50 years or so, okay? And the last time we had similar events was World War II and World War One. Events like today that are moving quick, and there are many moving parts, and there are weakening nations and nations that are rising, okay? And then we look at the nations that are being weakened. They are the nations that are more militarily equipped, that have a stronger standing in terms of economy. We're talking about the Western nations. They are weakening because they haven't got the ideology. Yep. And the nations that are strengthening are Muslim nations and Islam as a whole. And we see this by Western people coming to Islam in droves, especially after they see what's happening in Gaza.
Because your military will only get you so far. You can have the best of militaries, but if you don't have the people willing to sacrifice for that military, like in America, the fact that their recruitment numbers are at an all-time low shows how disenfranchised the people are by the establishment. The fact that they've dropped the requirement. Previously, it was you had to have finished high school at least in order to enter the military. Now they've dropped it back. The last time they did this was the Vietnam War. So to enter the military, we're accepting people who didn't finish high school, obviously with certain requirements. Yeah. But it shows how low the recruitment numbers are. In the UK, similar issues where people just aren't joining the army.
Even across Europe.
Yeah, they're not reaching the enlistment numbers.
Ukraine as well. That's one of the biggest problems they have in the war.
Even though they're directly at war with the invading neighbor, the people don't have that connection with their nation, with the ideology. You need to connect with your nation, which is why we saw America rise so quickly, because the people bought into this ideology, right? Which is why we saw, the Zionists entered even when it first started, how they sold this idea to the people. But once their lies were exposed, even within them, they're not even reaching the numbers that they want. They've had reservists who are refusing to come up. They've had people thrown into prison because they're refusing to join the army, and now having, hundreds, thousands in their streets protesting against the government, protesting against the war in Gaza, of Israelis living, and they're waving literally for the first time, unprecedented this past week, waving the Palestinian flag, protesting in Tel Aviv. Like, can you imagine that, right? But it shows how disconnected they are with the ideology, right? So whatever military you have, whatever technology you have, whatever economy you have, doesn't get you far. It can only last you for so much. It can only patch over the problems if your people don't buy into the ideas. And then we compare with what you said with Gaza, with the genocide that's happened in Gaza, with the amount of people killed in Gaza, with the over 1 million people in tents, without the basic necessities for human life, living in such situations, in a bid in order to break the people, to break the will of the people, to break the resistance of the people, to break their support for their own sons that are in the resistance inside Gaza. All of this, in order, it's like, and they still come out and say, we will still stand strong, we will still stand firm. And today, when we are talking about that the Israeli army is preparing to go into Rafah, where there's over 1.2 million people in tents, ready to go into Rafah, which will cause catastrophic civilian deaths after everything they've done in Gaza. And we see the people of Rafah coming out and saying, we will not leave Rafah into Sinai, into Egypt, because we know the moment we are displaced, we will never come back. We will die in Rafah. Okay, when the moment we see all this, these are people made out of something that the West has never seen. Okay, like that steadfastness only comes from believing in the idea.
Yeah, and this is where if we want to imagine a khilafah in the future, people talk about khilafah and like what's a khilafah going to look like. If you want to talk about a khilafah and what an Islam, why did the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he established the state in Medina, why did it grow so quick Okay, why did it expand so quick? Because of this ideology, because of this Quran.
Despite the resources, despite being weak in
Exactly.
numbers and military and so on, taking on the Persians and the Romans.
Yeah.
And victorious.
And because why? They had this Quran. They had this Islam. They had this Aqidah. And when Aqidah transcends into action and transcends into real action on the ground, into practical action on the ground, not just theory that we learn in lessons, in fiqh classes, in sharia classes, okay, where it's contained between Aqidah is about proving that your Aqidah is right and all their Aqidah is incorrect and they are misguided and they are kuffar, and just going back and forth in debates, etc. That's not what Aqidah is. If you want to talk about Aqidah is, you look at the people of Gaza, that's what Islamic Aqidah is. When you're faced with tribulations, it transcends into practical action and you can see it in force. That's Aqidah. From the child that's 2 years old up until the elderly man. They all have the same sentiments, okay? And so they are, it's like, you want to imagine a person, a big evil man, he's grabbed a few people, put them in a house, he's got a whip and he's continuously whipping them, and telling them, you need to give up, you need to surrender, you need to raise white flag, otherwise you will die. And they are persistent upon saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. And then we imagine the images of Bilal ibn Rabah, how they've got the rock on top of him and they are whipping him and saying to him, you know, Ukfur Billah, and he's saying Ahadun Ahad, Ahadun Ahad. This is the exact image. The people of Gaza is Bilal ibn Rabah, and Israel and America and all of them are Quraysh, whipping Bilal ibn Rabah, and they've put on all this weight on top of him, and then they're torturing him in order for him to let go of his deen and give up. And they are fighting back and saying, we will never give up. And inshallah, like, we have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His wisdom, that with what's happening today and with this persistence that we see, inshallah, it doesn't go to waste, and it will come out with a new birth of a new generation that will liberate the lands. Not just Palestine, will liberate the lands of Islam. Inshallah.
It's you, of course, try to analyze the wisdoms of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and only Allah knows the extent of the wisdoms. We can never find the answers. But when you compare to these incidents in the Seerah, and you see the hardship that they went through, but how that shaped the Sahaba and how that made them who they were, so that when they entered into Medina and established their state, they were able to take on the forces from Mecca and the Ahzab, the confederates of the Arabs who came to attack Medina and to take on the Persians and the Romans and so on. It was through that conditioning that they went through, that culturing, when they were in Mecca and then when they were in Medina. Allah Azza wa Jalla says about the Battle of Badr, like, one of the wisdoms behind it is لِيُحِقَّ الْحَقَّ وَيُبْتِلَ الْبَاطِلَ, so that He may show the truth to be the truth and the falsehood to be falsehood, to expose them for what they are. And if Gaza has done nothing else, it's exposed the truth and the falsehood over the last 4 months. And that alone is, if you can summarize what has it done to the world, what has an Aqsa flood to find an Aqsa, what has October 7 or the past 4 months shaped for the world, is that it's exposed the truth and exposed the falsehood, and opened it up, in particular for the Muslims. We hope that it's opened up the idea of what is truth, what is falsehood, and allowed us to then carry that concept for ourselves, for the next generation, to change the mindset of the Muslims around the globe, to change the way that we approach these issues. So it's no longer about me, it's no longer about just my country, no longer just about my borders. It's about sacrificing for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jalla. What does Allah ask for in this case? And the answers have never been clearer. You know, there's nobody that can sort of tiptoe around this topic. There's nobody that can give, half-measured answers. Anybody that does is getting exposed. You know, whether it's mashayikh or scholars or, speakers or leaders, anybody who gives these half-measured responses is being exposed straight away. The people aren't trusting them. They're losing their faith in them. And as a result of that, we see within these conditions is what Allah Azza wa Jal allows those people who deserve these titles, the people who deserve the leadership of the Ummah, Allah Azza wa Jal allows them to rise from these conditions to then reach these positions. And
it's always been the sunnah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He takes the people from ultimate weakness into leading the world, into becoming rulers. Like if you look at the Anbiya as well, Yusuf alayhi salam, the wisdom for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of having him thrown into a well. Did Yusuf know that in this many years he's going to be ruling a certain part of Egypt? Did Yusuf know that he's going to go from there and then into prison as well after that? Like imagine from hardship.
Slave and a prisoner.
In prison, a slave, and then a prisoner, like hardship after hardship after hardship. Obviously he didn't know that there was light at the end of the tunnel. Yeah. Like we know for certain there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we don't know when. He didn't know when this was going to happen. But he still sought to reach that light at the end of the tunnel. And the same for the ummah today. All we can see is darkness upon darkness upon darkness, but we know that at the end of this darkness, at the end of this tunnel, there is light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised for us. And He has promised for us that the land of Palestine will come back to the Muslims. These are all promises, these are all truths that we know are going to happen. But obviously we seek to reach that point through action and through knowledge and through spreading awareness and doing what we can within our means. And so we should never lose hope, and we should always be optimistic in the hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and never lose faith in the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Know that it is truth despite everything that's happening. Even the people, our strength is drawn from the people of Gaza, and the people of Gaza's strength is drawn from us, because we are one ummah. And there's a lot of messages from them. They say that when we see you guys supporting us and talking about us and spreading awareness and giving us hope, we draw our strength from you. And the same thing can be said, that we draw our strength from their resilience as well. Although they feel that they've been let down because there has not been the response from the ummah that should have been, which is to military be involved as an ummah in order to prevent these massacres from happening, in order to repel the Zionist entity from doing these massacres in Gaza. They feel like, you see their writings, you see their speeches, they feel like they've been let down, that it's gone on for this long. But we know that change sometimes takes a bit longer to happen, because there is a wisdom that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that we do not know. And like we saw, like in Syria, with what happened in Syria, the Syrian people in the Syrian revolution, okay, we saw that Bashar al-Assad is still in power. He's still welcome into the Arab League, internationally still welcome, obviously. So it doesn't mean that there is no light at the end of the tunnel. But these are phases that the Ummah is going through. These are phases of awareness, phases of masks being ripped off, faces, exposing the truth from falsehood. The Ummah goes through phases and phases and phases until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that this group of my Ummah is now deserving of the victory that He has promised. And this victory will come at a time where we least expect it and our enemies least expect it, and where they will not be ready for it, okay? And where when the victory comes, they are not able to extinguish the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
I think there's maybe as one final point, because I know I have to stop and pray Maghrib soon, but one of the biggest things that we can do is to change the way that we approach these problems. What you've just said right now just sort of hit the nail on the head, and to frame it that way in our minds, that, you know, the reason that a lot of people get disenfranchised, their emotions are all over the place, up and down, they lose hope, they lose motivation, is because we expect certain results, right? We go out with whatever activism that we do, with whatever dua that we do, with the expectation that I'm doing this so that the war in Gaza can end, so that there can be a ceasefire, for example, so that the people can, you know, return to the lives that they had, or so that they can have their freedom and their justice and so on. And that's my end goal. When we do that, we expect these results, we look for these goals, and when they don't come, we lose hope. We say, Ya Allah, my dua wasn't accepted. Ya Allah, my actions didn't achieve the goal that I wanted. And then as more time goes on and on and on, we spiral down this cycle even worse, right? But the way that you've just put it right now is that Palestine will be free. And this is one of the steps towards Palestine being free. That there might be setbacks on the road, that there might be what we see as roadblocks, there might be what we see as failures, but this is one long journey towards liberating Palestine, towards reviving our ummah, and that goal will be achieved. It's promised to us by the Prophet ﷺ, so no Muslim can deny it. But the question is, what will I do to continue to persevere and to be part of this effort? Right? Whether this war and battle goes on for another week and a ceasefire is found, or whether it goes on for another 5 years, we don't know. None of us can provide that answer. But it's one of the steps towards the liberation of Al-Aqsa. That I'm certain of. I don't think any Muslim who's looked into the text on this matter and understands the prophecies of Rasulullah ﷺ will deny this matter. That Al-Aqsa will be free, and this will, inshallah, be one of the steps towards that. So no matter how long it goes on for, no matter how many lives are sacrificed on this path, the question I need to ask is, what will I contribute towards this struggle? What will I answer towards Allah Azza wa Jalla when He tells me during your lifetime there was opportunity, Al-Aqsa was occupied and the Muslims liberated it? What did you contribute to that? Ya Allah, those millions of Muslims took part in the effort, I didn't. Imagine how shameful you'd feel, right? If everybody did that and you missed out on the opportunity.
Imagine you couldn't be a drop in the ocean.
Yeah.
Like the Ummah is an ocean. You can't be a drop in this ocean.
We just need to play our part.
That's it, play the part, be a drop in the ocean, and be part of this moving water. That's moving, it's not stopping. It's a moving water that's going to reach its destination.
Or even worse, to be one of those people that pushes it back. One of those people that tries to shut down efforts. One of those people that tries to, whether it's to collaborate with the government, one of those people that tries to normalize ties. You've got this massive tide of the ummah working towards the revival of Islam, the liberation of Aqsa, and you're one of the people trying to stop that tide and to push it back the other way.
Or you're one of those people that is the froth on top of the ocean, that like the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ mentioned. He said there will be al-wahan.
Yeah.
Al-wahan, and they asked him what al-wahan was. It's a love of life and the hate of death, and love of the dunya and hate of death. ولكنكم غثاء السيل. غثاء was, and then he said, what is غثاء? غثاء is the froth that's on top of, that's the scum that carried on top of the water, the beach when you see, or the froth. So imagine you are just that froth, you're going up and forth, you're just collecting all the dirt, and you're not that, the pure, clean ocean water that's working towards, obviously, this great movement of change. And the ummah is an ocean. If you look at the mass of the world, what's greater, the land or the ocean, or the water? So the ocean is greater. So the ummah is greater than anything out there on this whole planet. And if this ummah gathers its strength and unites, nothing can stand in its face. If the people of Gaza have not been broken after 4 months of the whole world were gathering against them, literally in front of our eyes, then imagine if the whole ummah was united, who will dare to stand in the face of the ummah? And I think it's sufficient for us to leave this answer with the viewers to answer that. And I think the answer is a very obvious one.
I hope that what we've done at least is present what Tufan al-Aqsa has changed in the world. Some people look at this and they say, what's the point of this resistance? And all you bring about is more death and destruction. But clearly we can see when we analyze some of these events, and we've just touched the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more depth behind any of the stuff that we've talked about today, which inshallah we'll expand on in the future. But there is change, and there is significant change and significant results that have come about due to this resistance that will continue, inshallah. So this is, one of the topics that I wanted to cover today, and to sort of go into some of this detail, and for all of us, especially as Muslims, to recognize that change is not an overnight thing, but there are many forms of change that we need to recognize. I don't mean to sort of keep drawing on, but I saw an interview with one of the ex-leaders of the Shin Bet, and he was talking about the Shin Bet is the Israeli intelligence, and he was talking about the way that the Zionists think of change and why it fails, the way that they think of victory and why it fails compared to the people of Gaza. He says that we just think of hard results, right? Hardware, as he called it. That we look at numbers dead, buildings destroyed. When we have more numbers that we've killed than they've killed from us, we are victorious. But he says the people of Gaza look at soft results. They look at change in the hearts and the minds of the people. And he said that this is, of course, as we've talked about when we talk about ideology, this is what causes long-term change. It's not simply killing more people. No war has ever been won by killing women and children, by killing civilians. No war in history. But through that steadfastness and that resilience, and through the soft victories, winning over the hearts and the minds of the people, and inshallah motivating the rest of the ummah, we will see change. We will see results. We will see the revival of this ummah, and we will see the liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa after these past 75, now going on 76 years of occupation. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us among those who are on the front lines of defending Al-Aqsa.
Amen.
May Allah Azza wa Jal keep the people of Gaza steadfast and strong. May He keep them resilient in all of their efforts, and may He unite our ummah to aid them in the ways that they deserve to be aided, and in the ways that Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded us to aid them. Inshallah, this is only the first of many episodes and many podcasts going into more detail on this. And as I mentioned, there are many topics that we want to unpack and that we need to unpack. There is no limit to how much we can speak about these past 4 months and the history of the occupation. And inshallah, it's something that we hope to delve into in more detail. So please do subscribe to us on our platforms. Please do follow our updates. Please do share this video around and keep up to date for any of our future episodes and future updates. Please feel free to reach out to us with any suggestions or questions that you have. And inshallah, we look forward to seeing you tuning in with us in the future. Jazakumullah khairan. Jazakallah khairan, Amir. And we'll see you all soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.